I'm going to try and pin it down to some local issues. But we're asked to consider the questions. What does climate change mean to you? What are the challenges we face? How can young people help? And that sort of thing. And I was racking my brain as to, is there a common theme throughout all these questions? And I actually took a straw poll with people at my office, and I said, what does climate change mean to you? And they came up with things like unsustainable consumption, carbon emissions, unachievable, the future, investment, polar bears, that sort of thing. And for me, it all boils down to rights. And I'll tell you why. Because today I was working on three things. The first thing was a joint venture in Saudi Arabia. And that was to produce a new plant to produce superabsorbent polymer, which is used, amongst other things, for nappies. And they were very concerned about who has rights to this income, who has rights to this land, and all that sort of thing. The second agreement I was working on today was all about, it's a CFL project, so a lamp project in Mexico, whereby they replace incandescent lamps with sort of these CFLs, which are more energy efficient, to produce carbon credits. And the question was, well, who has the carbon rights to these? Is it the local householders? Is it the Mexican government? Or is it our client who's actually investing the money and the time and the resources to put these things in place? And the third thing which I was looking at today was a wind farm off Belgium, and trying to understand the price of energy that's generated in Belgium from this wind project, and actually how much does it cost. And even though those were in 3 different continents and 3 very, very different scenarios, it all boiled down to rights. And my view on all of these questions, at least the majority of them, is what ownership can we give to each other and to young people to actually encourage the protection of rights. Now, by way of analogy, my garden is reasonably well kept because it's my garden. I have ownership of that garden, and I want to keep it as I want it I want it to look good. The problem with resources that are shared is that there's no real ownership of them. And you see this time and again. Years previously, before my current job, I worked quite a lot in fisheries. And you see in the high seas, you see this exploitation of fisheries. And it's very similar to what's happening with the climate at the moment. It's all about resources, and if you don't have protection of resources, if you don't have private property rights, then it's very difficult to protect them. So I guess the unifying thing that I came up with was rights, and I'd really like to sort of throw that out there and see what we get back. I'd also throw a few conundrums your way and see if we can solve some of those today. One I've sort of touched on a bit, which is about the difficulty that you have sovereign nations, and you can reduce that down to local communities if you want. How does a local community work with its neighbourhood local community to make sure there aren't problems at the junction, at the interface between the two? The second one is sort of a lack of foresight. We don't know how many things, the things that we do now may have unintended consequences, and we see this time and again in the environmental field. What consequences does biomass have, for example, on food production and that sort of thing? It's very difficult balancing act to play. And the third one is, well, it's not just about climate change. It's also about biodiversity and other environmental problems. And we talked about some earlier about poverty and that sort of thing. How do you actually balance up those competing interests? And once you get to the bottom of that, and I'll give you one example to finish. Some years ago, and this has been, Tim, you probably came across this, across the Severn Estuary there was a scheme to put a barrage across the Severn Estuary. And if it went ahead, it would produce about 4% of the UK electricity needs. And you think, well, that's great, this is free power. But of course, if you do that, then you're taking away all the mud flats and all that sort of thing, and your biodiversity is heavily compromised. So what you have on one hand is a very good renewable project, or at least in terms of energy production. On the other hand, it's a very bad biodiversity project. So again, how do you come up with that framework? How do you solve the rights of someone who needs electricity and the rights of the community to have a very biodiverse environment? So I'm going to just throw that out there as a question, and then we'll come back to that perhaps later. Thank you.